Good evening, all, and welcome back to Untold Fears. Tonight we venture into one of the most isolated and unforgiving territories on Earth, Nunavut, where the sun disappears for months, the cold can kill you in minutes, and the vast emptiness plays tricks on even the strongest minds. In the darkness of the polar night, strange lights appear over the frozen sea. Footprints lead to nowhere. Whispers echo from beneath the ice. And some doors, once opened, should never have been touched. These are 8 true stories from the edge of the world, where the line between reality and nightmare becomes as thin as the Arctic air. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Untold Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the frozen wastes of Nunavut, where civilization ends and terror begins. The first thing you need to understand is that I did not go north looking for anything supernatural. I went because my pastor told me Nunavut needed volunteers, and I wanted to feel useful for once in my life. I was 23, restless, and stupid enough to think a few months at a mission in the Arctic would be some kind of spiritual adventure. What I got instead was a reason to never sleep comfortably in a church again. The mission was a squat, aging building on the edge of a small community, its white paint dirty from years of wind, ice, and blown snow. There was a tiny chapel, a few bedrooms, a common room, and a basement that everyone pretended did not matter. The priest who ran the place was older, quiet, and kept his stories to himself. A couple of nuns rotated in and out, and once in a while elders would come by to talk, drink tea, and pray. For my first night there, I noticed something that no one ever mentioned, but everyone silently obeyed. When the sun dipped and the cold really set in, no one went downstairs. I did not think much of it at first. I arrived during a storm, tired and half frozen from the flight and the snowmobile ride into town. The wind howled around the building like a living thing, elastic and furious. I dropped my bag, warmed my hands over the old radiator, and tried to ignore the way the walls shook. After supper, the priest simply said, very casually, "Do not worry about the basement. You will not need anything from down there after dark." He said it like he was reminding me to brush my teeth. Then he locked the basement door, slipped the key into his pocket, and changed the subject. Days passed in a routine of chores, short walks in the brutal cold, and attempts at helping with services. The mission felt smaller than it looked from outside, as if the building itself was shrinking away from the winter. I started noticing that anything we might have stored downstairs, like extra candles or folding chairs, had already been brought up and left in corners upstairs. No one wanted a reason to go down there at night. When I asked one of the sisters about it, she just smiled too quickly and said, "The stairs are icy in winter, not safe. Better to stay up here." Her fingers tightened on her rosary while she spoke. The first time I heard it was about a week in. A blizzard had rolled in from nowhere, blinding white pressing against every window, drowning the world past the weak yellow circle of our lights. The chapel was empty except for a handful of people. We finished evening prayers early because the power had flickered twice. I was lying in my narrow bed, listening to the building groan, when the sound floated up through the floorboards. At first, I thought it was the wind forcing itself through some crack, but it was too steady, too rhythmic. It was a voice. No, several voices. Soft, low, almost a murmur. It sounded like someone was saying, "Hail Marys," over and over again beneath my room. Not in the flat cadence I knew, but in a whisper that seemed to rise and fall with the storm. A few words, then a pause, then a few more, muttered from somewhere under the chapel. I sat up, heart thudding, and held my breath. The voices did not stop. They blended with the wind, but they were not the wind. They were too precise. I put my bare feet on the cold floor and pressed my ear down. The wood was freezing, but the sound grew clearer. Someone was praying in Latin under the chapel in the locked basement that no one used after dark. The next morning at breakfast, I tried to mention it. I kept it casual, or at least I tried to. I asked if anyone had gone downstairs to pray during the storm. The priest's spoon froze midair. The nun sitting across from me looked at the priest, not at me. No one answered my question. Instead, the priest said, "Storms carry strange sounds. Best to ignore them," and change the subject. But his eyes did not meet mine, and I saw his hand tremble around his cup. After that, the praying became a regular thing. I would hear it on the worst nights, when the wind screamed and the building shuddered, and it felt like the world outside our walls had vanished. A low, steady murmur, like a congregation buried beneath us. Sometimes I thought I could pick out individual tones. A woman's voice, thin and cracked. A deeper voice, slower with a strange accent. It was never loud, but it was always there, exactly beneath the chapel. You start rationalizing anything when you are alone enough. I told myself maybe sound carried oddly through the pipes, or that someone had left a radio on downstairs. I told myself there might be some old storage room with a speaker I did not know about. Any explanation was better than accepting that locked concrete under our feet might not be as empty as the priest wanted me to believe. One afternoon, when the sun was barely a smear of orange on the horizon, I went downstairs. The priest was out visiting someone in the community. The nuns were in the kitchen. I waited until I heard them busy with dishes, then slipped the key off a hook by his door. It fit the basement lock with a tired, reluctant click. The air that rose up from the stairwell was colder than anything upstairs. A deep, damp cold that smelled like stone, old candles, and something metallic. The single bare bulb flickered when I pulled the chain. The stairs creaked under my boots. I forced myself to go down anyway, one hand on the rough wall, listening for any sound. The basement was smaller than I expected. A short hallway, a storage room with boxes and folding chairs, and at the far end a small chapel carved into the concrete itself. It felt wrong. The ceiling was low, oppressive. The air pressed against my chest. A stone altar sat against the far wall, a plain wooden cross above it. Rusty stains bled down the concrete beneath it, too old to identify, too strange to ignore. There were no radios, no speakers, no hidden rooms, but there were photos. On one wall, hung neatly in a grid of frames, were black and white pictures of people who had served at the mission decades ago. Priests, nuns, a few visiting volunteers. One photo in the middle caught my eye. A young nun, maybe late 20s, stood in front of the same altar. Her habit was pristine. Her smile was small, patient, and tired. Someone had written her name and a date at the bottom, but the ink had blurred. All I could make out was the first letters. I stared at her face, and a horrible familiarity crawled up my spine. I'd heard her voice. I did not know how, and I did not want to know why, but I recognized the softness, the cadence of her Hail Marys and the murmuring that had seeped up through the floor night after night. I ran back up the stairs and almost dropped the key when I locked the door. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hang it back on the hook. No one said anything when I returned to the common room, but I caught one of the nuns watching me with an expression that was not surprise. It was resignation. That night, I decided to prove to myself that it was all in my head. I told myself if I listened from the chapel and not my bed, I would hear nothing but the building settling. I waited until everyone went to their rooms and the hallway lights were dim. I sat alone in a pew, coat wrapped tight around me, the only light coming from a small red candle near the tabernacle. The rest of the mission went quiet. At first, there was only the wind and my own breathing. The silence stretched until I started to relax, almost disappointed. Then, with no warning, the murmuring started. It did not drift in from the sides like normal sound. It rose directly under my feet, as if the wood itself was speaking. A dozen voices, all overlapping, all whispering prayers. Latin phrases I recognized, twisted by accents and age into something almost inhuman. The words rolled along the floor and seeped into the pews surrounding me. I tried to stand, but my knees felt weak. I sat frozen, staring at the cross above the altar. The red candle flickered, and in the reflection on the polished wood, I thought I saw movement behind me in the aisle. A tall, thin figure standing just at the back of the chapel. I did not turn around, I could not. The voices grew slightly louder, like they were aware of me listening. Then one voice rose above the others. A woman's voice. The same soft tone I had heard under my room. The same voice that lived in that faded photograph on the basement wall. She began reciting a prayer I had not heard in any of our services. A long, slow litany, asking for forgiveness for those we kept here. Her words blurred, but that phrase stuck in my mind. Those we kept here, not those we served, those we kept. The air in the chapel shifted. The temperature dropped so fast I saw my breath plume in front of my face. The boards under my boots felt like ice. And then, right next to my ear, not below, not through the floor, but beside me on the pew, I heard her whisper my name. My full name. Clearly. Quietly. I stood up so fast my legs buckled, and I half fell into the aisle. The whisper stopped. The chorus below cut off mid-word, leaving the chapel in a silence so complete it roared. I did not look at the back of the room. I did not look anywhere but at the door. I stumbled to it, nearly ripping the handle off in my haste to get out. The priest was waiting for me in the hallway. He did not ask where I had been. He did not tell me I should not sit in the chapel at night. He just looked at me, his face lined in a way I had not noticed before, and said, "Some things do not leave just because we stop saying their names. You will be leaving at the end of the month." Yes, I nodded. I had not told him that. I had only decided it in my head. I left Nunavut 2 weeks later. I did not argue when he booked my flight early. On the way to the tiny airstrip, I watched the mission growing smaller behind us, a white shape swallowed by endless snow. I tried to tell myself I had been exhausted, that the isolation had gotten to me. But on the flight south, when I drifted half asleep, I heard it again. A faint, steady murmur just under the drone of the engines. A woman's voice saying my name the way a priest might read it from a list. I have not stepped into a church alone at night since. I know people can do terrible things, even in holy places, but what scares me more now is the thought that some places remember. And sometimes, when the wind is right and the lights are low, those memories start to pray back. The thing people never tell you about moving that far north is that the light itself can break you. When I accepted the government job in Nunavut, all anyone wanted to talk about was the cold. Buy good boots, they said. Get the best parka you can afford. Watch out for frostbite. No one warned me what it would feel like to live in a world where the sun never went down, where 3 in the morning looked almost exactly like 3 in the afternoon, and your brain stopped believing in the idea of night at all. I arrived at the tail end of spring. The snow was still piled up in dirty walls along the roads, but the sky was bright and clear and endless. Someone from the office met me at the tiny airport, helped me toss my luggage onto the back of a truck, and drove me to staff housing. My unit was small but neat. 1 bedroom, a narrow living room, a kitchen just big enough for one person to move around in at a time. The window in the bedroom faced toward the water, which at that time of year was still mostly frozen. A flat white plain under a pale blue sky. "It gets really beautiful in summer," my driver said, gesturing at the window. "Just do not forget to get blackout curtains. Trust me." I did not really understand what he meant until the first night I lay in bed at 1 in the morning, exhausted from travel and orientation, and watched the light leak around the edges of the thin blinds. It was not bright like noon, more like that soft, washed-out light you see an hour after sunrise down south. But it never faded. It just hung there. I checked the time on my phone over and over because my body refused to believe it was night. The first week, I treated it like a novelty. I sent photos to friends back home saying things like, "Look, it is midnight, and you can still see everything." We laughed about it over video calls. I told myself I would adjust. People lived here all their lives. They were fine. I would be fine. Except I did not adjust. Not really. Workdays stretched until they blurred. I would look up at what I thought was late afternoon and see it was almost 9. Co-workers shrugged and stayed a little longer because, why not? It is still light. I started drinking more coffee to keep up, then more because I was not sleeping, then more because the idea of going back to my too-bright bedroom and lying there wide awake made my stomach clench. I bought blackout curtains like everyone told me to, but cheap curtains on a government salary in a place where everything had to be shipped in were not enough. The rods were flimsy. The fabric gapped along the sides. Light still crawled through every crack, thin golden stripes that fell across the bed and the floor and my closed eyes. After 3 weeks, my sleep was down to a couple of hours at a time. I did not feel tired the way I was used to. It was not the heavy, blissful exhaustion after a long day. It was a buzzing in my bones. My thoughts sped up and tangled around each other. My heart felt like it was beating half a step ahead of my body all the time. That was when the noises started. The first night I heard it, I had finally drifted off maybe an hour before. I remember because I looked at my phone one last time, 2:11 a.m., and thought, okay, this is ridiculous. I have got to force myself to sleep. The fan hummed on the dresser. The blackout curtains leaked their strips of light. My brain finally let go. Sometime later, a soft knocking pulled me back. I opened my eyes but did not move. It took me a second to understand what had woken me. 3 slow taps. A pause. 3 more. It sounded like someone rapping their knuckles against the wall just above the head of my bed. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a neighbor. The units were stacked close together, and if someone hung a picture or moved furniture, I could sometimes hear it. But this was too precise, too close. I could feel the vibration in my pillow. I waited. The knocking came again. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. Methodical, almost patient. I told myself it was the wind. The building shifted a lot. I'd heard it creak like an old ship when the gusts hit just right. Maybe a loose cable was slapping the siding. Maybe ice was shifting somewhere on the roof. I rolled onto my other side, pulled the blanket over my head like a child, and eventually fell back into a shallow, twitching sort of sleep. The next night, it happened again. Different time. Same pattern. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. This time I sat up and turned on the lamp. The room looked exactly the same. My suitcase half unpacked in the corner. A stack of files from work on the chair. The thin line of day seeping around the curtain rod. The wall above my head was bare. The paint was cracked in one place, but there were no pipes there, no radiators, nothing that should make that sound right at that spot. I got up, pressed my palm against it. The drywall felt cold and solid. No vibration, no noise. Just my own breathing, too loud in the small room. By the 4th or 5th night, it had become a ritual. I would lie there, not really sleeping, eyes closed, waiting for the knocks. They always came when my thoughts started to slow, never when I was wide awake, never when I was fully asleep. Always in that in-between space. Then the footsteps started. They came from above me. Heavy, dull thuds crossing from one side of the ceiling to the other. Slow, deliberate steps. Heel, toe. Heel, toe. Pacing. The problem was simple. I lived on the top floor. Logically, I knew there was no one above me. I had seen the roof from outside. I had climbed the stairwell that ended at my door. There was nothing up there but insulation, boards, and snow. And yet, at 3 in the morning, with my heart climbing into my throat and my nerves raw from weeks of bad sleep, logic felt thin and fragile. I started tracking it in a notebook. Date, time, what I heard. Knocking at 1:47. Footsteps at 3:12. Once, soft scratching, like fingernails dragging along the ceiling at exactly 2 or 2 a.m. During the day, I made jokes about it to one of my coworkers, a woman who had grown up in the community. "Your buildings are haunted," I said, trying to make it sound light. "I think there is a guy living in my ceiling." She gave me a long look. Not amused, not surprised, just measuring. "The light gets to people," she said finally. "You should get more sleep. Try a sleeping mask. It helps." "I'm hearing footsteps upstairs," I insisted. "I'm on the top floor." She shrugged one shoulder. "Old buildings. They move. Our elders say sometimes the land remembers other people, other houses. Sometimes you hear what used to be there. Do not listen too hard. Do not listen too hard. Easy advice when you are not the one lying in bed at night counting knocks on your own wall. The line between real and imagined is not a straight line. It is a sliding scale, and that summer I slid a lot farther than I want to admit. I stopped going out with coworkers after shift. I told myself I was too tired, but the truth was I was afraid of facing the quiet of my unit any later than I had to. I bought thicker curtains, duct taped the edges to the wall, shoved towels along the windowsill. Still, the light bled in, a dull, accusing glow. Sometimes my reflection in the glass looked wrong. It took me too long to realize it. But one night, as I stood there brushing my teeth, I saw myself blink in the window a fraction of a second after I felt my eyelids move. A tiny, almost imperceptible lag, as if the glass was not showing me now, but some version of me a moment behind. It only happened when I was exhausted. I told myself that over and over, but once you start doubting your own eyes, it spreads to everything else. The whispers came last. At first I thought they were leaks from someone else's TV. A thin, sibilant murmur that seemed to come from the vents. Words blurred by distance. Then I realized they always started when I turned off my own devices. Phone face down, laptop shut, fan humming, light off, my breathing slowing. Then, like a switch had been flipped, a voice, just on the edge of hearing, from somewhere in the wall behind my head. I could not make out language, just the rise and fall like someone talking to themselves in the next room. Too low to understand, too insistent to ignore. I lay there, frozen, every muscle tensed. For once, no knocks, no footsteps, just that soft, one-sided conversation. After what could have been minutes or an hour, the voice stopped on a long, drawn-out exhale, the kind of sigh a person makes when they finally give up trying to be heard. The next morning at work, my hands shook so badly I spilled coffee on a file. My supervisor pulled me into a private office. "You look terrible," he said bluntly. "Are you all right?" "I'm not sleeping," I admitted. I'm hearing things." He did not laugh. He did not tell me I was crazy. He just nodded slowly. "It happens," he said. "We bring people up who have never been this far north, and we throw them into 24-hour day or 24-hour night. The brain does not like it. Sometimes it breaks a little. You should take some time. Go south for a bit." I wanted to say no. I wanted to prove I was tough enough, adaptable enough to handle it. Instead, I heard myself say, "Okay." I do not remember much about the flight down. I know I stared out the window as the endless white and blue gave way to patchwork forests and lakes. I know my ears rang with phantom knocks. I know I half expected to see my own reflection on the plane window move wrong. Back in the south, in a city where nights were properly dark and the sky actually changed color, I checked into a small clinic for exhaustion and anxiety. That was the official phrase. The unofficial one was that my mind had frayed under too much light and too much silence. The doctors were kind. They called what happened to me a reaction to extreme environmental stressors. They gave me pills to sleep, and for the first week I blacked out for 10 hours at a time, free-falling into a darkness I had started to believe did not exist anymore. I thought it was over. But here is the part I do not tell them. Here is the part I am putting here because I need it out of my head. Sometimes, even now, in this crowded city with its sirens and street lamps and ordinary nights, I wake up at exactly 2 a.m. The room is dark. The curtains do their job. There is no sun bleeding around the edges. My ceiling is only a few feet above me, perfectly still. and from somewhere just behind the wall above my pillow, 3 soft knocks tap out in a neat little row. Pause. 3 more. No one is above me here either. People tell me the north gets into your blood. They mean the land, the sky, the quiet. I think that building did something different. I think when you listen too hard to the noises in a place like that, something starts listening back. Maybe it is only my mind replaying a pattern it cannot forget. Maybe I cracked a little up there, and the crack never closed. Or maybe there really was something in those walls, pacing the ceiling, waiting for someone tired enough, thin enough to hear it. And maybe once it finds an ear, it does not care how far south you run. All I know is that I now sleep with the head of my bed pulled 6 inches away from every wall. And when people talk about visiting the Arctic in summer to experience the midnight sun, I smile, nod, and change the subject. I do not tell them that there is a kind of horror that does not need darkness at all. It only needs too much light and a mind that is starting to come apart at the seams. I always thought living on the edge of the community meant more space and more quiet. I did not realize it also meant that when someone decided to come for you, there would be no one between you and them but a few inches of wood and a deadbolt from the hardware store. At the time, it was just me and my little boy in that row of houses near the edge of town. My partner worked on rotation at a mine site, 3 weeks in, 3 weeks out. When he was gone, I tried to stick to a routine: supper by 6, bath time, a cartoon, then bed. After he fell asleep, I would clean up, check the locks, and sit with my tea at the window for a few minutes, looking out at the snow and the ridiculous amount of sky. That night, it was colder than usual. The kind of cold that makes the air sting in your nose when you open the door. The kind that swallows sound. My son had finally passed out after an argument about one more story. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the heater and the faint whistle of wind around the siding. I was rinsing dishes when the first knock came. It was not polite. It was not the kind of light tap a neighbor uses when they come by to ask for sugar. It was a heavy fist on the front door, 3 hard bangs that made the frame shudder. My whole body went tight. No one just dropped in at that hour, not this far out. I dried my hands on a towel and walked to the door, staying to the side where whoever was outside could not see me through the small pane of glass. Another 3 bangs shook the wood. "Hello?" A man's voice, muffled by the door in his parka. "Please, I need help. My machine died. I'm freezing out here." The accent was local, or close enough. I could picture the scene clearly. Someone stuck out there in the dark, snowmobile dead, cold eating through his gear. I had seen what weather could do to people. When someone was in trouble, you helped. That was how it worked here. That was how my parents had raised me. I almost opened the door without thinking. Before my hand touched the lock, something in the back of my head hissed, "Wait." "Where are you stuck?" I called instead, trying to keep my voice calm. The hallway light was off. I stood there in a dim glow spilling from the kitchen, aware of my own heartbeat in my throat. "Just out past the last houses," he said. "On the trail by the point." I walked back. "Please, miss. It is bad out here." The point. That was the part that snagged in my mind. The trail by the point had not been groomed in days. I knew because my cousin had complained about it on the phone earlier. The last snow had drifted high. If his machine had gone through, I should have heard it earlier. The sound carried out here. You always knew when someone went by. "Do you have a radio?" I asked. "Have you called anyone?" "It died," he said quickly. "Battery is finished. Please, I just need to come in and use your phone. Warm up a little. I'm right here. I am freezing." His voice was wrong. Not the words, but the way he said them. The rhythm. There was no ragged, breathless edge to it. If he had really just walked back in that temperature, his teeth should have been chattering, his breath fogging up the glass. Instead, it sounded smooth. Practiced. I breathed in slowly through my nose. "My son is sleeping," I said. "I cannot have people in right now. I will call someone for you." For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No sound from outside. Then his tone shifted, softening in a way that made my skin crawl. "I'm not just some stranger," he said. "We know the same people. I saw you at the store. You are Amelia, right?" Hearing my name from a mouth I did not recognize almost made me undo the lock by reflex. That was exactly why he had used it, I realized. When someone knows your name, it is supposed to make them less scary. Familiar. "Who are you?" I asked. "Mel," he said after the slightest pause. "I did some work on your place last year. The windows. You remember." I did remember the windows being done. I did not remember a Mel. The company had sent 2 guys in and out in a day. I'd barely looked at them. In that moment, everything I had been ignoring clicked together. The way he had gone from panicked to smooth. The fact that he somehow knew I was alone with my son. The casual use of my name like we were friends. The detail about the point not lining up. I stepped back from the door, moving as quietly as I could on the floorboards. "I will call the RCMP," I said. "They will come check on you and your machine." The friendly tone snapped off like a light. "There is no need for that," he said. The words were still level, but there was something flat under them now. "Just open the door. It is not a big deal. I am freezing. Do you want me to die out here?" That question sent a bolt of anger through my fear. It was the kind of thing a grown man should never say to a woman alone in the dark. "If you really walked from the point," I said louder now, "you can walk to my cousin's place 2 doors down. He has 4 big dogs and a radio. Go ask him for help." Silence again. Long enough for me to hope he had actually taken the hint. Then the door rattled in its frame as he put his weight against it. The deadbolt held, but it sounded weaker than I had ever noticed. The wood creaked. My son stirred in his room and let out a small, confused sound. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed my cousin first. His number went straight through. "Do not open your door," I said as soon as he picked up. "There is a man here saying his machine broke down. He is not right." "I see no tracks," my cousin said. I could hear him walking to his own window. "No machine marks on the road. No parked sled. Just your place. 1 set of prints. Stay inside. I'm coming." Another slam on my door. This time there was no pretending it was just him leaning. He was trying to shoulder it in now. "Amelia," he said, and the way he stretched my name made something deep in my chest go cold. "You should not make me angry. You have a child in there." Every instinct I had screamed at once. I put my hand against the door, not to hold it so much as to feel every movement. "I am on the phone with the police," I lied. "They can hear you." He swore under his breath. The sound turned into a harsh laugh. "You think they get here fast enough?" he asked. "You think anyone does?" There was another slam, harder this time, and I heard something hairline in the frame give a tiny crack. My son started crying now, the thin, frightened wail he only made when he knew I was scared too. Then, through the thick of his crying and my blood rushing in my ears, I heard a new sound from outside. A man shouting a name that was not mine, boots crunching on snow, one of my neighbor's dogs barking in that deep, serious way that meant it had stopped being a game. The pressure on the door vanished. The footsteps outside moved away fast. A moment later, my cousin's voice came through the glass. "It is me." "Do not open," he said. "Stay with the boy. I am going to follow his tracks till the others get here." I sank down against the wall, knees giving out, phone still in my hand. I heard more voices outside now, another engine, the distant wail of a siren that almost never sounded out here. The whole time, my son clung to my arm, shaking and asking if the bad man was gone. They did not catch him that night. The tracks led out past the last houses and into the dark, toward the hard-packed trail that ran along the edge of town. The wind had already started to fill them in by the time the officers arrived. There were too many places to disappear out there, too many snowmobile paths and half-frozen streams. Later, sitting at my cousin's table with tea I could not drink, I heard the rest of it. A man fitting that description had been harassing women online in town for months, showing up near their houses, asking weird questions. There had been a break-in a few communities over. A woman alone with her kids. He had used the same story. Broken machine, freezing to death. Please let me in. They had a name now and a plate for his machine. They said he would not try it again here. They said he would move on. That was supposed to make me feel better. I moved my bed away from the front of the house. I pushed a dresser under my bedroom window so no one could see in easily. I hung a heavy blanket over the door so I did not have to look at it when I walked down the hallway at night. It did not matter. The image of that door shaking under a stranger's shoulder was burned into my mind. To this day, when someone knocks after dark, I freeze. My heart goes back to that moment when a voice I did not know said my name through 3 inches of wood and metal. When he reminded me, in the ugliest way possible, how far out we really were. People talk about the dangers of the land up here, the cold, the storms, the thin ice. They warn you about polar bears and whiteouts. Those things are real, and they are terrifying, but they are not the only predators that learn how to use the snow and the distance to their advantage. Sometimes it is just a man in a parka on your doorstep, smiling under his hood and pretending he is freezing to death. And sometimes the only thing standing between him and your child's bedroom is whether or not you decide to turn a lock. People like to assume that when you grow up in a place like this, nothing about the land can really surprise you anymore. I used to say the same thing. I was born here, raised here, hunted here, worked here. I know the ice, the sky, the way the wind sounds when it is about to turn bad. There's comfort in thinking you understand your home. Then one night out on the frozen bay took that certainty away from me in less than an hour. It was late winter, one of those times when the light is finally starting to come back, but the cold is still mean. My cousin and I decided to go out on the sea ice to check a line and maybe stay overnight. It was nothing unusual. We loaded the sled, topped up the gas, and drove out past the last snowmobile tracks until the community was just a low, dim glow behind us. We picked a spot we had used before, a few kilometers from shore where the ice was thick and solid, away from pressure ridges. The sky above us was clear, full of stars, with the aurora trailing a green curtain across it. The kind of night that makes outsiders talk about magic. For us, it was just good weather. We set up our little tent, drilled a couple of holes, checked the cracks, and the sound of the ice with our poles. Everything felt right. The deep, steady groan when you put your ear to it told me the ice was thick. No hollow spots. No strange echoes. After we ate, we sat outside the tent for a while, backs against the sled, watching the aurora move. It was quiet enough that I could hear my own breath. The world out there is big, but that night it felt calm, like a sleeping animal. I do not know exactly when the first light appeared. At first I thought it was a star I had not noticed before, low on the horizon where the sky met the faint line of land. It was white, not green like the aurora, not blinking like a plane. Just a single, steady point. I remember squinting at it and trying to decide if it was above the land or over the ice. "Do you see that?" I asked my cousin. He followed my gaze and grunted. "Probably just a plane," he said, "or one of the towers blinking." We watched for a minute. The light did not move. It did not blink. It just sat there, unnaturally steady. Then, very slowly, another dot appeared beside it. Same brightness, same height, then another. Within a minute, there were 5 of them, lined up in a perfect straight row just above the horizon. "Those are not towers," my cousin said, his earlier confidence gone. "There are no towers out there, just ice and water and far-off cliffs where the land rises again." We sat up straighter. The aurora was still moving above us, but now it felt like a background curtain. Those 5 lights were something else. They did not flicker like reflections. They did not sway like flares. They just hung there, silent. We whispered without meaning to, as if we were afraid of waking something. "Could be a ship," I suggested. "Lights on the deck." "A ship on top of the ice," he said, Use your head." We argued in low voices for a few more seconds, both of us throwing out explanations we did not believe. The bay was still frozen solid. There was no open water for anything that big to move through. Then the lights moved. They did not drift or wobble. They slid sideways, all at exactly the same speed, like they were bolted to a straight bar. After a short distance, they stopped, held still for a breath, then glided back the way they had come. No sound, no visible source, just 5 perfect white points moving in formation. I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. Something about the precision bothered me more than if they had darted around randomly. It looked deliberate, controlled. "That is not natural," my cousin whispered. I wanted to pack up and leave right then, but hunting teaches you to watch, to gather information before you move. So we kept watching. We told ourselves if they came closer, we would get on the machines and go. The machines were already half turned toward shore. All we had to do was jump on. The light stopped again. This time they rearranged themselves. Slowly, smoothly, they shifted from a straight line into the shape of a triangle. 3 at the corners, 2 in the middle. Then they began to rise, climbing higher into the sky as one. That was when the sound started. It was not loud. If anything, it was almost too quiet. A low, steady hum that I felt more in my chest than I heard with my ears, like the vibration when a big truck idles far away. Except, there was nothing around us. Nothing above us but those lights. Nothing under us but ice. The ice answered. At our feet, the deep, solid groan we had heard earlier changed. The vibrations through the frozen surface shifted from slow and lazy to tight and nervous, like something huge was moving somewhere down below. Tiny crystals of frost sitting on top of the snow trembled, dancing in place. My cousin swore under his breath and stood up. "We are not staying here," he said. "I do not like this." I agreed. We started grabbing our gear, not bothering to fold the tent properly, just yanking pegs out of the ice and shoving things onto the sled in a mess. I tried not to look at the lights, but it was like trying to ignore a person staring straight at you from across a room. The hum grew a little stronger. The lights stopped climbing and began to drift forward, out over the ice, angling inland, toward us. Something in my body wanted to bolt like a scared animal. At the same time, another part of me felt heavy, slow, like moving through water. It took an effort to make my hands keep working. "We go now," my cousin said, voice sharp. "Now, Benjamin." We got the tent mostly collapsed and jammed the last of the bags onto the sled. My fingers fumbled with the rope. The usual night sounds of the ice, the far-off cracks, the soft sighing shifts, had gone almost completely silent under that low hum. I swung my leg over the machine and hit the starter. The engine whined, sputtered, then caught. Relief washed through me. My cousin's machine started a heartbeat later. The familiar roar filled my ears, finally giving me something normal to hold on to. "Go," he yelled over the noise. "Do not look." Of course I looked. One of the lights had broken formation. It dipped lower than the others, dropping toward the ice in a smooth, unnaturally controlled arc. As it descended, it grew brighter, not like a flame or a headlight, but like a single point of pure white glare. It stopped a short distance above the surface, maybe 100 meters from our camp, close enough that the snow around it glowed. There was still no visible object there, no structure, just that point of light, hanging in the air, humming. The ice between us and it emitted a sudden sharp pop, like a gun firing a long way off. A thin crack shot across the surface, racing not toward the light, but under our machines. The sound went straight through my boots and up my spine. That broke whatever thin thread of curiosity had been holding us in place. We opened the throttles and tore away from that spot, sled bumping behind us. The machines screamed over the ice, eating the distance between us and the faint lights of the community. My goggles blurred. The wind slapped my exposed skin. For the first minute, I did not dare look back. When I finally did, the lights were higher again, further away, still in their triangle, still watching. or at least, that is how it felt. The hum had faded, swallowed by the roar of our engines and the rush of air. Behind them, the aurora rippled like nothing unusual had happened at all. We did not stop until we were almost at shore, where the ice was thicker and scarred with old cuts from countless other trips. We finally let the machines idle, breathing hard, steam rising from the hot engines into the cold night. "Tell me you heard that," my cousin said. His face looked paler than usual under his hood. "Tell me you felt that under your feet." "I did," I said. My mouth was dry. The hum, too. We sat there on the machines for a long moment, letting the sound of their engines comfort us. From that vantage point, the lights on the horizon looked smaller, less threatening. If you did not know to look for them, you might have mistaken them for stars. We did not tell anyone that night. Back home, warming our hands around mugs of tea, we tried to put it into a story that sounded acceptable, something that would not make us sound drunk or foolish. All the versions we came up with sounded crazy. The next day, we asked casually if anyone had noticed anything strange in the sky. A few people shook their heads. One elder frowned and said he did not like when anyone talked about the ones who travel without sound. Then he changed the subject so hard it was like a door slamming. Later, I checked the ice reports. No unusual movement. No thaw. No sign that anything big had passed under that part of the bay. The rational explanations are easy to list. Some kind of military exercise no one told us about. Satellites reflecting the sun in a way I had never seen before. An unusual auroral phenomenon affecting the ice and our senses. Sleep deprivation playing tricks on two men already used to long winters. I can say those things out loud. Sometimes I even believe them for a little while. But sometimes, late at night when the sky is clear and quiet and the bay is frozen solid again, I find myself standing outside my house, looking toward that same stretch of horizon. My feet remembered the vibration. My chest remembers the hum. And even if there is nothing unusual to see, I get the creeping feeling that something out there is still moving, still watching. People from down south come up and talk about how the lights in the sky are beautiful, mystical, spiritual. They post photos of the aurora like it is some friendly show put on just for them. I do not argue. I let them think that. I just do not tell them that sometimes, under those curtains of green and white, other lights move too. Lights that are too straight, too deliberate, too quiet. Lights that make the ice itself shudder like it is afraid. And once you see them, the land you thought you knew so well never looks quite the same again. You would think that after a lifetime on this land, I would have learned not to ignore the rules the elders talk about in that quiet way of theirs. I always nodded, said I understood, repeated the stories to visitors when it suited me, but I did not really believe that breaking those rules could make something follow me home. I do now. I work part-time as a guide for Southern tourists. I'm not a big outfitter or anything like that, just a local who knows the land, the ice, the weather, and can keep people from dying while they chase their Arctic adventure. Most trips are the same. Men and women in expensive gear, posing for photos with the cliffs and the fjords behind them, tired but happy by the time we turn back. That spring trip was supposed to be like any other. 2 clients, both from far away, both with brand new boots, and the kind of confidence that comes from never really being in danger before. They wanted to go into a remote fjord, farther than I usually take people. I told them it was late in the season. The ice could be unpredictable. The weather could turn fast there. They smiled like I was telling them a ghost story. "We are paying extra," one of them said. "We want the real North, not the tourist version." That should have been my first sign to say no, but the money was good, and I told myself I would be careful. I checked the conditions. I looked at the satellite images. I spoke with a couple of older guys who knew the area. "Do not let them walk around too much out there," one of them said. "And do not stay overnight near the inner walls of the fjord. It is not our place." He did not say why. I did not ask. That was my first mistake. The day we went out was cold but clear. The sea ice was solid. The entrance to the fjord rose around us in dark walls of rock, stained with old ice and shadow. The tourists loved it. They kept turning in circles on the sled, taking photos, pointing at everything like children. Inside the fjord, the world went quiet. The wind died down. Sound bounced strangely between the rock faces, dull and flat. It always feels a little like stepping into someone else's house when you go that far in. You're still in the north, but it is not the same north as the bay or the open land. We stopped at a spot I had used before, a wide shelf of ice near one wall where the snow was packed, and the view back down the fjord was dramatic. Perfect for photos. I set up a small camp while they wandered around with their cameras. "Do not go near the edge," I called. "There could be hollow spots." "Relax," one of them shouted back. "We will be fine." They walked farther than I liked, heading toward a section of shore where the rocks sloped down in a long, dark line. I could see old ice piled there, thick and gray, like it had been pushed up and left to rot. I started after them, more annoyed than anything. That was when I saw the marks. They were in the snow and old ice near the base of the rock. At first, I thought I was looking at tracks from a big polar bear, but they were wrong. The impressions were too long, too deep, spaced too far apart. Something heavy had moved there, something that did not lift its feet so much as drag them. Long grooves scarred the ice as if claws or long toes had dug in. The two tourists were standing right beside them, posing, laughing. "Take a picture of this," one called when he saw me approach. "Your bears are huge up here, man." I did not get close enough to stand in the prints. I stopped a few steps back, every instinct telling me that whatever had made those marks was not something I wanted my smell mixed up with. "These are old," I said. "We should not stay here." They rolled their eyes, but they followed me back to camp. I tried to shake off the unease. The sky was still clear. The ice beneath us was thick. We cooked. We drank hot tea. We told stories. By the time the dim light began to shift toward evening, the tourists were tired and happy, faces red from the cold. "We should head back soon," I said. "I do not want to be out of the fjord too late." That was when the taller one said it. "We paid for overnight," he reminded me. "This is perfect. No wind. No problem. We want to stay here." Part of me wanted to say no. The other part remembered the extra money and the fact that the air was still calm. I told myself the marks were old, that whatever had made them was long gone, that the elders worried too much. "Fine," I said, "but we camp here, not by the rocks. And if the wind changes or the sky looks bad, we go. No argument." They agreed, easy as anything. We set up the tent, anchored it well, and settled in. It was some time after midnight when the wind returned, not as a full storm, just a slow creeping push that made the tent fabric shudder. I woke up to that sound, and the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt heavier, colder, in a way that did not match the light movement of the fabric. I lay there, listening. Under the sigh of the wind, under the soft snores of the two men, I heard another sound, a faint, rhythmic scrape. It came through the ice, not the air. Drag, pause, drag, pause, like something massive was moving along the underside of the frozen surface. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just the ice shifting with the tide. That sound carries strangely in the fjords. I almost convinced myself. Then something bumped the tent. It was not a gust. It was not someone rolling over. The whole structure jerked inward, once, hard enough to make one of the poles creak. The two men startled awake. "What was that?" one asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Probably the wind," I lied. "Stay inside. I will check." I unzipped the flap just enough to stick my head out. The air hit my face like a knife. The sky above the walls of rock was clear, studded with stars. The aurora was faint, barely a smear of green. There was no sign of a storm. The ice around the tent looked normal in the dim light from my headlamp. No cracks, no new snowdrifts, just a faint mist hugging the surface of the fjord, like breath. I almost closed the flap again, Then far out toward the center, I saw movement. Something large and pale slid just under the ice, slow and deliberate. I saw it not directly, but as a distortion, the way the light from the stars bent around it. The mist above that patch of ice trembled, then parted slightly as it passed. I felt my heart hammer in my chest. I have seen bears, walrus, seals. I know how they move under the ice. This was not that. It was too big, too long. The shape did not break the surface. It stayed under, gliding along as if there were no difference between water and solid. The scraping sound came again, closer now. Drag, pause, drag, pause. "Get dressed," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Now, both of you. We are leaving." They started complaining immediately, asking questions, laughing nervously. I did not answer. I shoved gear into bags, threw everything onto the sled in a heap. The scraping grew louder. The ice vibrated under my boots like the skin of a drum. Then, from just beyond the edge of our camp, a shape began to rise. The ice did not crack. It did not shatter. It bulged slowly, as if something underneath were pushing against it. The snow on top slid off in little avalanches. My headlamp beam shook in my hand as I tried to hold it steady. For a second, through the thinning layer of ice, I saw something press close. A pale, elongated head, wrong in a way I cannot fully explain. The proportions were off. The eyes, if that is what they were, reflected the light in a dull, reddish way that did not look like any animal I know. Long, thin limbs unfurled, then vanished as the thing slid back down, leaving only a smooth, wet sheen on the underside of the ice. I heard one of the tourists swear behind me. "What the hell is that?" he shouted. "Get on the sled," I said. "Do not stop to film. Do not talk. Get on." For once they listened. Fear does that. They scrambled onto the back as I swung onto the machine. My hands shook on the handlebars, but when I hit the starter, the engine caught immediately. The sound felt like a shield. As we pulled away, the sled jerked once, as if something had grabbed it from behind. The engine strained. For a horrifying second, I thought we were not going to move. Then there was a sharp cracking noise, like ice under tension snapping, and we lurched forward, hard enough to throw one of the men sideways. I did not look back. I kept my eyes on the faint trail we had carved coming in, following it back toward the lower, safer ice and the mouth of the fjord. The wind picked up as we went, pushing at my parka, trying to shove us sideways. The engine whined, then settled into its rhythm. Only when the walls of rock began to fall, back and the open bay spread ahead of us, did I let myself breathe. I slowed just enough to glance over my shoulder. The fjord behind us looked ordinary. Dark rock, flat ice, stars. No bulges, no mist, no pale shapes moving beneath the surface. Only the faint, broken line of our own tracks. If I had not felt the thing under the ice drag at the sled, I might have wondered if I had imagined it. The tourists bailed on the rest of their trip the next day. They moved to a hotel, made some excuse about needing to catch an earlier flight. I do not know what they told people back home. Maybe they turned it into a crazy story to tell at parties, something they could laugh about. Our guide freaked out in the middle of the night and dragged us out of this beautiful fjord because he thought there was a monster under the ice. I stopped taking people there. I stopped going myself. At home, for a while, I would wake up at night convinced I heard that same dragging sound underneath the floor. Not loud, not constant, just enough to make my heart race. I moved my bed, checked the crawl space, told myself it was the building settling. Then, one morning, after a heavy fog, I stepped outside and saw prints in the snow by my house. They were not like the ones in the fjord, not as deep, not as long. But they were wrong in the same way. Long impressions, space too wide for any normal animal, with shallow grooves between them where something had dragged. They started near my front step and walked away toward the edge of town. There were no prints leading to the house, only a way. I stared at them for a long time, until the wind started to blur their edges. Maybe the land was reminding me of something the elders have always known. You do not bring strangers into certain places. You do not treat the fjords and the deep inlets like a playground. You do not assume that just because you have a snowmobile and warm clothes, you belong everywhere. I still guide sometimes. But when people ask about going deep into that fjord, I tell them no. I tell them the ice is not safe, or the weather is bad, or I'm booked. I let them think I am being cautious for ordinary reasons. I do not tell them that I have already heard what moves under that ice when it is quiet. I do not tell them that for a brief, sick moment, I felt it grab hold of the sled like it did not want us to leave. And I definitely do not tell them that on still nights, when the fog hangs low over the bay, I sometimes think I see a long, pale shape sliding just under the surface, heading toward the mouth of that fjord like it knows exactly where we live. 6. Clara. When I first took the nursing contract up north, everyone kept warning me about blizzards and whiteouts. They told me to respect the land, to check the forecast, to never think I was tougher than the weather. No one ever mentioned that sometimes, in a storm, you can walk into a place that should not exist anymore. I was on my 3rd rotation in that Nunavut community when it happened. By then, I had convinced myself I was starting to get the hang of things. I knew which houses belonged to which families, which elders would actually take their meds, and which needed a little coaxing, which streets drifted over fastest when the wind picked up. I even started leaving my headlamp at home on short walks, because the route from the clinic to my temporary unit had become muscle memory. That day, the storm rolled in faster than anyone predicted. The morning had been gray and flat, the kind of sky that promises snow without committing. Around noon, the wind shifted. By mid-afternoon, the world outside the clinic windows was a roiling white wall. Snow blew sideways, erasing shapes, chewing up color. The radio crackled with travel advisories. I should have stayed put and slept on the cot in the staff room like everyone told me. But one of my regular patients, an older woman with brittle lungs, had called earlier, complaining that her breathing felt tight. I had gone over on the snowmobile to check on her before the worst of it hit. We adjusted her meds, checked her oxygen, made sure she had everything she needed. By the time I stepped back outside, the world I thought I knew was gone. The houses nearby were just vague, darker smudges in the whiteout. The street I had walked 100 times in clear weather was invisible. I could not even see my own tracks from the trip over. The wind had eaten them in minutes. I told myself it was fine. Keep the wind on one cheek, count your steps, follow the faint outline of the power poles. It was not far. I wrapped my scarf tighter, pulled my hood down low, and started walking, head bowed against the stinging snow. Sound changed in the storm. My boots on the packed ground made almost no noise. The wind howled in a constant, directionless way that made it hard to judge where it was coming from. I focused on breathing and on not letting panic crawl up my throat. At first, I thought I was doing well. I passed a shape that had to be the small green house on the corner, then another that looked like the duplex where a young family lived. It was impossible to be sure, but my sense of distance said I was roughly on track. Then, all at once, the wind seemed to stumble. The screaming in my ears dropped to a lower moan. The snow stopped hitting my face full force and swirled around me instead in softer eddies, like I had stepped behind some invisible barrier. I looked up. There, a short distance ahead, was a house I had never seen before. It was small, only one story, with a steep roof and walls, painted a color that might once have been blue but now looked washed out and tired. Light glowed faintly from the front window, a warm, yellowish rectangle in the white. Snow had piled up along the sides, but the front steps were clear, as if someone had just shoveled them. For a moment, relief overwhelmed everything else. A house meant people. People meant directions, maybe even a ride back, or at least a chance to warm up and get my bearings. I walked up to the door and knocked, my gloved hand thudding on the wood. The sound felt wrong, too flat, like knocking on a stage prop. But someone had lights on, and the wind had eased near the wall, and I was cold and tired. When no one answered, I tried the handle. It turned easily. The warmth hit me first. Not the dry electric heater warmth I had gotten used to, but a heavier, humid heat, like from an old stove. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and something stewed too long. I stepped inside, shutting the storm out behind me, and for a heartbeat, I just stood there, letting my eyes adjust. The interior looked like a snapshot from a decade I had only seen in old photos. The couch sagged in the middle, its floral fabric worn to threads. A lace curtain hung half-crooked over the front window. A crucifix and a faded calendar shared space on one wall. A round table sat in the middle of a small kitchen area, 2 chairs pushed back, as if the people who had been sitting there had just stepped away. On the stove, a dented kettle sat on an unlit burner. When I touched it cautiously, the metal still felt lukewarm. "Hello?" I called. My voice sounded too loud in the small space. "I am sorry, the door was open. I got turned around in the storm. I just need to know which way the clinic is." No answer. No footsteps, no voices, just the soft tick of something cooling and the distant muffled roar of the blizzard outside. I shrugged off some snow from my parka but left it on. Every instinct told me not to make myself too comfortable. I moved a little farther in, calling out again as I passed the table. That was when I noticed the photos. They were clustered on a low shelf near the far wall, black and white, some in cheap frames, some just propped up. Families in parkas, children squinting at the camera. A young couple standing in front of this same house, freshly painted, snow clean and undisturbed around it. In one of the pictures, the house looked different, half buried. Snow drifted almost up to the roofline. A crude black X had been painted across the front door. The faces of the people in that one had been scratched out so thoroughly that the paper was torn. I swallowed, suddenly very aware of how quiet the place was. Somewhere above me, floorboards creaked. A slow, careful step. My gaze snapped to the ceiling. There had not been any stairs in the main room. I had not seen a hallway either, just the kitchen, the sitting area, and a closed door to what I assumed was a bedroom. "Hello?" I called again, trying to keep my voice steady. "It is the nurse from the clinic. I'm not here to bother you. I just need directions." Silence. Then, from behind the closed bedroom door, the sound of something small dropping to the floor. A soft thud. Then a roll as if a toy had been knocked off a shelf. Against my better judgment, I walked over and pressed my hand against the door. The wood felt oddly cool, almost damp. My glove stuck for a second before sliding free. I opened it. The bedroom was dim, lit only by the spill from the main room. A narrow bed with a thin, patterned blanket sat against one wall. A dresser with a cracked mirror faced it. On the floor, near the foot of the bed, a small wooden car lay on its side, one wheel still gently spinning. I could feel that I was not alone. It was not a dramatic, movie kind of presence, just a pressure in the air, like walking into a room where someone has just had an argument, the sense of words still hanging there. Did they send another one? The voice came from behind me, very close to my left ear. High and small, the hesitant tone of a child. Every muscle in my body seized. I turned slowly. No one stood in the doorway. No one stood by the dresser. The living room beyond glowed the same, the yellow light flickering slightly as if the bulb were old. "Who is there?" I asked. My throat felt tight. Silence again. Then, from somewhere above, the floor creaked once more, like a single careful step. I backed out of the bedroom, heart pounding, and closed the door. The toy car stayed where it was, wheel finally still. I wanted out. Warmth or no warmth, directions or no directions, whatever was off about this place outweighed the storm outside. At the front door, I hesitated just long enough to glance at the window. For the first time, I realized that the view did not make sense. The glass showed only a gray static blur. No shape of the neighboring houses I thought I had passed. No faint outline of power poles. Just a blank whiteness pressed right against the pane like fog, not blowing snow. I did not wait to examine it. I opened the door and stepped back into the storm. The wind hit me full in the face, harder than before, intense enough to stagger me. I grabbed the door frame to steady myself and turned, meaning to pull it shut behind me and at least keep some of the heat in. There was nothing there. Where the house should have been, there was open snow, half-drifted and dirty. No steps, no walls, no light. Only a shallow depression, where a foundation might once have been, and a few old boards sticking up at odd angles, half buried. For a second, I thought I had walked the wrong way, that the wind had spun me and I had come out somewhere else, but my own tracks were clear behind me for a few meters before the storm swallowed them. 2 lines of prints leading directly from empty air to where I now stood. I do not remember exactly how I found my way back after that. I know I stumbled, fell once, got up again by sheer stubbornness and the memory of the map in my head. I followed the faintest hint of a snowbank shape, then the shadow of a building I actually recognized. By the time I banged on the clinic door, my fingers were going numb inside my gloves. Inside, everything was normal. My coworkers fussed over me, scolded me for walking in that weather, handed me a mug of coffee and a blanket. I told them I had gotten turned around and found shelter in some house I had not seen before. "What house?" one of them asked, frowning. "There are no new units out that way." I described it. Their faces changed. An older staff member who had grown up there looked at the floor for a long moment before speaking. "There used to be a place like that," she said finally. "Family lived there when I was a kid. There was a fire in a bad winter. People said it was the wiring, others said something else. Afterward, they marked the house and tore it down. We were told not to play near the old foundation, to leave it alone." She hesitated, then met my eyes. "You said you heard a child," she added. "You should not answer if you hear that again in a storm. Just keep walking." I laughed it off in front of them. Said I was hypothermic, tired, that my brain had filled in the gaps like it always does. That night, alone in my unit, I lay awake listening to the wind claw at the windows and doors. Every so often, just at the edge of hearing, underneath the storm, I thought I heard a small voice asking a question it had asked before. Did they send another one? I do not do home visits near the edge of the community in bad weather anymore. I tell people it is because of safety protocols, because I learned my lesson. That is true as far as it goes. What I do not say is that I am afraid that one day, in the middle of another whiteout, I will look up and see that house again. Same sagging couch, same photos with the scratched out faces, same toy on the floor. And I am afraid that this time, when the child's voice asks its question, I will be tempted to answer. People always talk about how easy it is to get lost out on the land, like you take one wrong turn and the tundra just swallows you. What I still cannot wrap my head around is how someone can vanish between 2 houses and the shoreline in a place you have been walking since you were a kid. I grew up in that community. I knew every shortcut between homes, every snowbank that drifted the same way each winter, every rock that stuck out near the shore. By the time this happened, I was in my mid-20s and could almost walk that path with my eyes closed. That is part of why it still feels impossible. It was late autumn, the time when the water is starting to think about freezing but is not quite committed yet. The days were getting short, and the wind coming off the bay had that mean edge it only gets when the ice is not there to soften it. My friend and I had eaten supper at my aunt's house, and we decided to walk down to the shoreline to check on the old boat we kept pulled up near the rocks. The route was simple. From my aunt's, you cut between 2 houses, follow a beaten path past a couple of sheds, then cross a strip of open ground to the shore. It took maybe 10 minutes if you were talking and not paying attention, 5 if you were in a hurry. We had done it 100 times, in worse weather than that night. There was a fog coming in, though. That is what I remember most clearly at the start. Not a thick blanket yet, just low gray bands rolling in off the water, curling around the piles of rock and snow like smoke. The streetlights near the houses made it glow a bit, giving everything a soft, blurry edge. It looked almost peaceful. "Looks creepy," my friend said, grinning like it was a joke. "Good night for a ghost story." We kept talking about nothing much, the way people do when they have known each other their whole lives. Work, family, whether the boat would survive another winter or finally fall apart. Our boots crunched on the ground. The fog lapped at our ankles. By the time we passed the last shed, the fog had thickened. The light from the houses behind us faded faster than it should have. Sound changed too. Our voices did not carry the same way. The air felt heavy, close, like we had walked into a room instead of an open field. "Stay close," I said, more out of habit than fear. "I do not want to step in any mud or a soft spot." He laughed. "You are the one who gets lost in your own kitchen," he said. "I'm fine." I could still see him. That is important. He was a few steps ahead of me, his parka a darker shape in the gray. Not far enough to be a problem, just far enough to make fun of me over his shoulder. I watched his breath plume out in little puffs. I watched his boots lift and plant, following the line we had walked so many times. The fog swirled around him, never quite covering him completely. I remember thinking that the shoreline could not be more than another minute away. Then his replies started to sound wrong. I said something about how the boat would probably smell like old fish and gasoline when we got there. He answered, but his voice sounded like it was coming from a little farther off than it should have, as if he had turned his head away. The words themselves were fine, but the distance was off. "Slow down," I called. "I do not want to trip." "Come on," he answered. His shape was still right there in front of me, maybe 3 body lengths away. "You are always slower." Except his voice, this time, sounded like it was coming from somewhere to my right. Not directly in front, where his back clearly was. Like there were 2 of him, the one I could see and the one I could hear, just slightly out of sync. I stopped walking. "Hold up," I said. "Where are you exactly?" He did not stop. His silhouette kept moving forward, a little deeper into the gray. For a second, I thought maybe he had not heard me. "Stop messing around," I said louder. "Just wait." He did stop then. The shape paused, shoulders lifting like he had taken a breath. The fog thickened around him in a way that made my stomach flip, swallowing him up to chest height. "Lucas," he said. Except now his voice sounded behind me. Every hair on my body stood up. I spun around so fast I almost slipped. There was only fog, no shape, no outline of anyone's body, just the faint glow of the house lights far off, blurred and smothered. I turned back. The shape ahead of me was still there. Or maybe it was again there. I could not tell. Same height, same heavy parka, same familiar stride as it took another step forward, like someone on a treadmill. "Do not joke," I said. I could hear the panic in my own voice now. "Say something normal." There was a silence that felt stretched, too long for the distance between us. Then he laughed. It sounded like him, but like an old recording of him. Thin, stale. The sound did not sit right in my ears. "Come on," he said. "We are almost there." His outline took another step, and that broke whatever had frozen me in place. I lunged forward, wanting to grab his hood, his arm, anything solid. My hand closed on nothing. The fog in front of me thinned for a second, enough for me to see that there were no footprints beyond where I stood. Our tracks from the houses ended at my feet, a pair of messy lines in the dirt and thin snow. Beyond that, the ground was smooth. No impressions, no scuffs, no sign that anyone had taken a single step further. I spun around again, heart pounding. The glow of the community seemed farther away than it should have, like the houses had retreated while we were not looking. My own breathing sounded too loud. The fog pressed tight around me now, cold and damp. "Stop it," I yelled. "Where are you?" Nothing. No laugh this time. No voice. Just the muffled roar of my own pulse and the strange, deadened way the fog swallowed every sound. I forced myself to stand still and listen. really listen. After a minute, maybe more, time was strange in that gray box. I realized what was wrong. I could not hear the water. On clear nights, even from that distance, you could always hear the bay. Little waves slapping the rocks, the distant creak of shifting ice when it was forming, the occasional crack as it broke. It was a familiar background noise, so common that most people stopped noticing it. That night, there was nothing. No water, no shore. Just the same heavy silence in every direction. Some survival instinct kicked in then. I stopped calling his name. I stopped trying to push forward. I turned my back on where the shoreline should have been and walked slowly, carefully, toward the faint, hazy lights of the town. Every few steps, I looked back, half expecting to see his shape reappear. It did not. Our tracks behind me stayed the same. One pair of prints leading from the houses to where I now was, then nothing. By the time I reached my aunt's place, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. When I stumbled through the door, my face must have said everything, because she did not ask why I had come back alone. She just asked, "Where is he?" "He was just there," I said. My voice sounded distant in my own ears. "We were together. He was right in front of me, then—" I could not finish. Every attempt to explain made it sound more ridiculous. The search started almost immediately. People fanned out along the path toward the shoreline, down by the rocks. The fog lifted a little as the night went on, like it was done with whatever it had been doing and had decided to move on. They found our tracks, just like I had seen them. 2 sets from the houses to that midpoint, then only one coming back. No wandering footprints veering off. No signs of a fall or a struggle. Nothing leading toward the water or back toward town. It was as if he had walked up beside me, turned in place, and stepped into air. They dragged the shoreline anyway. They checked with friends in case he had somehow circled around and ended up somewhere else. Days turned into weeks. Gossip turned into whispers. People asked me the same questions in slightly different ways, hoping my story would change, that I would remember some small detail that would make sense of it. I kept thinking about that one moment, when his voice seemed to be in front of me and behind me at the same time. About the way the fog had folded in around us like a curtain, about the silence where the water should have been. There are explanations if you want them. Maybe I had a panic attack and got turned around. Maybe he had run off as a joke and something bad happened somewhere else, something with a more ordinary kind of predator. Maybe the fog made me misjudge distance, direction, everything. I cling to those on good days. On bad nights, when the fog rolls in off the bay just so and wraps around the houses in low creeping bands, I stand at my window and feel that same pressure in the air. Sometimes, if I crack it open, I swear I can hear someone calling my name from somewhere out in it. Not loud, not urgent, just a familiar voice asking me to follow. I do not. I keep the window shut, the lights on, and remind myself over and over that it is just the wind, just memories, just grief. Because if it is not, then I have to accept that there is a place between the houses and the shore where the world is thinner than it should be, and that once it takes someone, it does not feel any need to give them back. There are some names from my teenage years in Nunavut that I still cannot say out loud. When I left, I thought distance would blur them, make everything feel smaller, less sharp. Instead, the farther I got, the clearer one winter in particular became. The older I grow, the more I realize that what we did was not justice. But I still cannot decide what the alternative should have been. I was 16 that year, angry at everything for no real reason, like most teenagers. There were maybe a few dozen kids my age in the whole community, and we all knew each other's business, whether we wanted to or not. On weekends, we would sneak out to drink cheap liquor someone's cousin had smuggled in, huddling behind sheds or in half-broken shacks on the edge of town, doing our best to feel older than we were. He arrived in the middle of that winter, the new teacher. They always came and went, but this one was different from the start. Younger, cleaner, with that southern confidence and a smile that stayed on his face even when he was not talking. The first time he walked into our classroom, a few of the girls giggled. A couple of the boys rolled their eyes. I remember thinking he looked like someone from a TV show, slightly out of sync with the room around him. At first, we liked him. He seemed to get us more than the older teachers. He talked about music and movies, not just homework and attendance. He said the school needed a youth leader, someone the kids could trust, and the principal was thrilled to have him run extra programs. He stayed late after class. He offered help with assignments. He started coming to the same places we hung out at night, at first by accident, then more and more on purpose. He was careful about it. He did not bring alcohol at first. He just showed up, hands in his pockets, saying he wanted to understand what we were dealing with outside of school. He nodded a lot when we complained about our parents and the boredom. He laughed at our jokes. He acted like one of us, just a little older, just a little wiser. When he did start bringing things, bottles mostly, he framed it as a favor. If you're going to drink, he would say, better it is something clean, and you are with someone who will look out for you. Some of us saw through it right away and kept our distance. Others, like me, liked the attention, liked feeling chosen. Then he started singling people out. It was not me, and I still hate admitting that a small, selfish part of me was relieved at the time. It was my friend Rose instead. She was 15 then, quiet and a little shy, with that kind of brightness in her that made adults call her sweet. He praised her essays in class more than anyone else's. He said she had potential, that he could help her get into a good school down south. He offered extra tutoring after hours. At first, she was flattered. We all were, for her. She started staying after class, then coming home late saying she had been at the school working. Then she stopped saying much at all. We noticed the changes in pieces. A bruise along her wrist, yellowing at the edges, that she said was from slipping on the ice. The way she flinched when someone touched her shoulder from behind. The way her eyes slid away when his name came up. She laughed off our questions, said we were being dramatic. One night, in the cramped back room of an old shed, with wind rattling the loose boards and cheap vodka burning in our throats, she broke. "He will not stop," she said. Her voice was flat, like she had used up all her tears already. "He says he is helping me, that I owe him. If I tell anyone, he says he will tell the school I am making it up, that my family is trying to ruin his life, that I will ruin my chance to leave here." We sat there, stunned, a ring of half-drunk kids suddenly faced with something that did not fit any story we had about ourselves. We knew this kind of thing happened. We had heard about it in other communities, in old stories no one wanted to repeat. It felt different when it was one of us and someone we saw every day standing at the front of a classroom. We argued about what to do. Some said go to the principal. Others said the principal liked him too much. Some said tell the RCMP. Others asked who would be believed more, the nice young teacher from down south, or the drunk kids who had been sneaking around with him for months. In the end, we decided something I am still not proud of. We decided we would handle it ourselves. It was my idea to confront him in a place where no adults would overhear. The old storage shed near the edge of town, the one my uncle used to keep tools in before it started sagging from the snow. It was far enough away that the only people who went there were kids and stray dogs. We did not tell Rose at first. It felt like we were protecting her, even though we were also taking her voice away in the process. We waited until we knew he and she were supposed to be studying at the school late. 3 of us watched from across the road as they left together, him walking just a little too close, her shoulders hunched. We followed at a distance, sticking to shadows, and parked snowmobiles. When they reached the shed, he opened the door for her like a gentleman. She hesitated, then went inside. He followed, closing it behind them. We gave them a minute, then went in after. The inside smelled like old wood and gasoline. Our flashlights cut through the dark, beams catching on junk piled in corners. Rose was near the back, pressed against the wall, eyes wide. He was between her and the door, his smile twisting as he saw us. "What is this?" he asked, and his voice had none of that friendly tone he used in class. "You will leave her alone," I said. My hands were shaking, but anger made my voice steadier than I felt. "We know what you're doing. It stops now." He laughed, the sound sharp in the cramped space. "You think anyone will listen to you?" he asked. "You're drunk half the time. You skip class. You're exactly what they expect you to be. I am the one writing letters for you. I am the one who can say what kind of kids you are." It escalated fast after that. He tried to brush past us to grab Rose's arm. One of the boys shoved him. He shoved back. In the chaos, someone swung a piece of wood, aiming to scare, not to hurt. The crack of it hitting his head sounded wrong, dull and final. He dropped to one knee, hand going to his temple. For a second, we all froze, waiting for him to curse, to shout, to do anything. Then his eyes rolled back, and he pitched forward onto the concrete floor, his head hitting again with a sickening thud. He did not move. Time stretched. The shed seemed to shrink around us. Rose was sobbing now. One of the boys kept saying, get up," like a broken record. I crouched down and put my fingers near his mouth, near his neck. No breath, no pulse I could find. In that moment, the full weight of where we were and who we were slammed into me. A group of drunk teenagers, alone in a deserted shed with a dead teacher. A teacher people liked. A teacher who could not hurt anyone anymore, but whose body told a story no one would believe had happened the way it did. We had a choice, and I wish I could tell you we chose differently. No one suggested calling the police, not seriously. The adults in our lives had taught us, without meaning to, that certain systems were not built for us. We pictured the headlines, the questions, the way every mistake we had ever made would be dragged out as proof that we were lying. "We cannot leave him here," someone whispered. "We cannot bring him back," someone else said. In the end, we waited until the settlement was as quiet as it ever got. Then we wrapped his body in an old tarp from the corner of the shed, loaded it into a sled, and tied it down. The world outside was bitterly cold, the kind of still night where sound carries too far. Every gust of wind felt like it would strip our faces off. We drove out onto the land farther than I had ever gone without adults. The moon hung low, turning the snow into a flat, unreal plain. No one spoke. The only sounds were the motors and the faint scrape of the sled behind us. At a spot my uncle had once used to dump old junk, far enough that no one went there without a reason, we stopped. We dug in the snow until our hands burned, pushing through to the hard layer beneath. The ground below was frozen solid, so we made a hollow in the drift instead, deep enough to hide him for the night. We told ourselves we would come back in the spring with adults, with the truth, when it would look less like a crime and more like exposing one. We told ourselves this was just a temporary burial, that we needed time to figure out how to speak. We lowered him in as gently as we could. Rose turned away, shoulders shaking. We covered him, packed the snow down, smoothed it over. The surface looked like every other drift. By the time we got back, the aurora had started to move overhead, green curtains twisting silently. The sky did not care what we had done. He was gone by Monday. That was the story anyway. Staff said he had left suddenly for family reasons. No one from outside came to ask questions. No one in authority asked us what we knew. We never went back to that drift. Years later, living in the South, I read stories about investigations into abuse in northern schools, about predators shuffled quietly from one community to another, about victims who were never believed until it was too late. Each article felt like a knife turning in a wound that had never really closed. I do not know if what we did saved Rose or condemned someone else in another town who never got to see it coming. I do not know if his body is still there in that old snowbank, or if the land finally took him properly. What I do know is that every time someone down here talks about dark crimes in remote places, like they are abstract, like they belong to another time or another kind of person. I feel the cold of that night in my bones again. I see his face in the dim light of the shed. I hear the sound of wood on bone, and I hear the silence afterward. The way the community folded around the absence of him, like it was better not to ask where he went. Part of me still thinks we did the only thing we could. The rest of me is not so sure.